Hey everyone, this is Julian from Scott's team. We'll start in about 4 minutes. So just hang tight, we'll start soon.
Hey everyone, Scott Sambucci here. I am at the controls. There's actually two of me logged in. You get twice the bang for your buck. It's actually not two of me. There's just me, Scott Sambucci, and let me make my Julian. And the other person is actually Julian Herrero, who is. Can you hear me okay, Julian?
Yep, we got you, man.
Cool, man. Can you activate my Oh, I got to start my video. There we go. I did it. We landed on the moon. We got a video to work. Awesome. So we've got some folks logging in right now. Bob, good to see you. David, Jeremy, what's up in Portland? Timothy A. Phoebus. Is that you, Timothy A. Phoebus? Amarjeet, William, Bill, Hendy, also known as from ZBooks. Or is it Zai? I'm kind of curious how you pronounce that. So as a quick audio check before we get things kicked off here in just a moment or two, first of all, can you hear me? If you can hear me, look for the chat box and post a little note there that you can hear me loud and clear, as I want to make sure the audio is working well, because if the audio doesn't work well, all you're going to see is for the next hour and a half. So loud and clear, says Bob. That's awesome. Thumbs up. Yes, Zai books, XY books, says Bill. Jeremy says yes. So I also assume you can see me in my purple shirt here in my office. I'm looking outside and it's a super windy day here in Northern California. So I'm kind of curious for you guys, wherever you are, what's the weather like where you are right now? Because right now there's like 40-mile-an-hour winds outside of my window and I'm watching these birds fly against the wind and leaves go flying across. So what's the weather like where you guys are right now? Type that into the chat box. Cloudy and cool in Austin. That sounds good. It's fall weather, you know. That's the way things should be right about now. Cooler and a beautiful day in Santa Clara. Burr and blue skies. Blue skies in Portland in November. Is that possible? I didn't know that seems like so unusual for Portland. Overcast in Toronto, foggy in Seattle, says Ankita. Also cold and gray. Oh, Tyler's also in Austin. Cool. Timothy in Las Vegas is chilly, but the tables are hot, he says. Chilly in Norway, says Tor. Tor, good to see you. It must be pretty late for you, Tor, because I just got off of one of our coaching calls with our clients. I have a client out there in Norway, and it was pretty late. He was sitting on the couch, and I could hear the kids in the background as he was trying to get some work in before too late there. So Molly says it's cold and gray in Minneapolis. Snowflakes is no surprise. Yes, I mean, it's November. It's probably been snowing for a month and a half now in Minnesota, I'm sure. So land of 10,000 lakes. Is that what it is in Minnesota? 10,000 lakes there. So I got it. See, I know I almost said my geometry. I know my geography. Awesome. So let's do this. What do you say? It's a couple minutes past the hour, and I want to officially welcome you to the live sales Q&A where I answer your questions about anything sales related. So I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. Let's start with the bad news first. The bad news is I got like 22 questions that were submitted. So I've got this huge list of questions that I was pouring through yesterday in preparation for today's call. That's the bad news. The good news is I was able to kind of group and categorize all of the questions that were asked into a couple of main kind of categories, if you will, or a couple of different sort of piles. And so what I want to do is I want to spend about 5 minutes just walking you through kind of the different categories of questions that we're going to go over as part of like a really, really simple sales model. And I think if we do that as a baseline, then as you are logging in and you're thinking through whatever question you asked, you'll be able to identify where your question is going to fall. And separately, I think there's probably lots of stuff in there that even if you didn't specifically ask a question, you're going to learn a lot from the other people's questions, which is why we do these things in a group format. So what do you say? Should we rock and roll? Should we do this? We get a thumbs up? Ready to go? Yes, says Gary. Hey, what's up, man? Good to see you, Gary. All right, so let me show my screen. And here we go. Awesome. So can everybody see this, this whiteboard? And I'm going to do a whiteboard and scribble on it. Whiteboard and scribble. Hold on a second. Let me just exit this. If I have to do another app, I will, but I think this one will work. Sorry, guys, having a little technical glitch with my Apple Pencil. Okay, I got charge. Here's what we'll do. If that doesn't work, nothing like a real technical glitch to throw people off. Good news, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Got a backup app. Let's see if this one works. Compose a new note. Oh man. Hold on, just hang with me, gang. This is just making you really, really want the help here. Give me just a second. Demos go the same way, says Bob. Yeah, this is how you can really test how cool someone can be under fire. Can they buy time or they just pray that the Apple Pencil actually works here? So looks like this is not working for me. So what I'm going to do, give me just 1 second. Okay, guys, I'll be right back. Just used this Apple iPad app about 13 minutes ago before we joined the call, and for some reason it just decided not to work now. So I'm going to see if maybe it's just that I need to charge this up, in which case we should be good to go if that's all that it takes. Well, this doesn't seem like it's going to work. Yes, they have the Bluetooth connection working. You can plug the Apple Pencil into your iPad. Yes, thanks, Jack. The Apple iPad is connected to my laptop, which is how you're seeing the iPad in the first place. So let's see if we can try one more thing. I can honestly say that this has not happened to me in the past. So, all right, well then here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna draw along with me. Jack is my IT manager right now. Did I plug the Apple Pencil into the iPad's Lightning port? Let's try this real quick. One last thing. And if not, then you guys can just draw along with me. Nope, that's not going to work. Okie dokie. Aha, we got it. Ta-da. I fixed it. Do you know how I fixed it? I unplugged it and I plugged it back in again. The old turn it on, turn it off, turn it on way of handling the IT problem. So cool. All right, so now here we go. So as I was saying before, we had, hey Shavik, good to see you. And so what I talked about is that we had about 20, I think it was 22 questions. And so the way I want to think about this is in terms of the, oh man, it just, what the hell just happened? Just conked out on me again. Dude, this is the weirdest thing. It just, you guys saw it working, right? Aha, all right. There we go. Okay, now I got it. I said we got about 20 some questions, and the way that we're going to categorize your questions is thinking about an overall sales funnel. I like to keep things really, really simple whenever I'm thinking about sales funnels and sales models and all of the stuff that goes into selling. And so if we think about the sales funnel, your overall sales process, there's kind of three main parts. There's your prospecting, and the goal of your prospecting is ultimately what we want to do is find leads. And specifically, I like to qualify that, pun intended, by saying we want to find qualified leads. That's the job a lot of times of marketing. You have your marketing qualified leads that come into your sales funnel and you're trying to convert them into sales qualified leads, for example. It could be the results of some outbound that you're doing, whether it's outbound email, outbound cold calling, those sorts of things. And I know there's some questions around that. And so that's step one is you're prospecting. You're pulling future opportunities into your sales pipeline. The second part of the sales process is that sales pipeline. So that's where we've qualified, we've taken our sales leads and we've almost, think of it as like filtering them through this layer that goes between the sales prospecting work that we're doing and actually qualifying them. So they're coming through and some of those end up becoming actual sales opportunities. And so that's why as a sales manager or a CEO, you're looking at a sales pipeline and saying, I've got these opportunities in different stages. Sometimes they're early stage, sometimes a middle stage, sometimes it's late stage. So after a deal is qualified, then typically kind of the next steps are you should have a couple more conversations with other people, the other buyers involved. You're probably going to do a product demo at some point. You may need to follow up with a second demo that's more technical. People ask you for proposals, so you want to talk through work plans and implementation plans and all of those steps along the way to go from sales lead all the way through your sales pipeline and into ultimately the last step is where we want to turn that sales pipeline into paying customers. right? That's where they're obviously paying us money, and that's what we want. And so these are kind of the three main buckets of questions that we've got. The fourth bucket was looking at this from a sort of like a management standpoint, because we had a few questions about things like, how do I manage my team? When should I hire? Who should I hire? What's the right time, the right timing to do that hiring? And so what we're going to do today is we're just going to kind of work through this funnel. So first I'm going to pick up most of the prospecting questions, then we're going to work on pipeline questions, then we're going to work on paying customer questions, and then finally looking at any of the management stuff. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in. And so the first couple questions that we got on the prospecting side of things really kind of focused on finding leads. More specifically, some of the questions, and I'll just sort of like paraphrasing, how do I find qualified leads? As an example, how do I find prospects that may not necessarily be on LinkedIn? So LinkedIn is obviously a really popular place for us to go do our business prospecting, but there are some industries where the contacts that you're going for just aren't on LinkedIn. We have a client in our startup selling program called Osmose Systems, and they sell a water filtration, a water monitoring device for shrimp and fish farms. Most of the work that they're doing right now is in Latin America and China. And those shrimp farmers and fish farmers just ain't on LinkedIn. So we had to get really, really creative in terms of how we're going to start doing our prospecting work with them. Some other questions around prospecting were things like, how do I convert a connection on LinkedIn into an email campaign? How do I get them out of my social network and into my marketing list? And Julian, by the way, can you make it so that my video is showing? I think right now your video is showing because it's just got my face. Can you change that around? Start my video.
Your video is showing.
Okay, it is. Okay, cool. It just wasn't showing for me. Got it. Okay, cool. So those are the kind of the questions that we're going to talk about first, is everything around lead management and finding qualified leads. And so the first thing that I want to do is sort of tackle this question about how do I prospect when my leads aren't on LinkedIn? And the reason I want to tackle this question first is it's important for the team that asked this question, because they're like, hey, my leads aren't on LinkedIn. I think more importantly, more broadly, I think a lot of times we get a little bit lazy and we forget that there are a heck of a lot more things that we could be doing in order to do our sales prospecting outside of LinkedIn. And so when I thought about this question and I said, okay, what if I just woke up tomorrow and let's say LinkedIn just completely disappeared? What if whether it's my market working with startups or it's your market and you're dealing with the people in your marketplace and the segments and industries that you're dealing with, whether it's hospitals or retail companies or people in telecommunications or banks or any of the other industries that you're dealing with, like what if we all woke up and said like, oh man, I thought that I could go on LinkedIn today and do some prospecting. Well, what if that was just disappeared and we didn't have that available to us? What would we do? Like, how could we actually go out and do some prospecting? And so a couple of things that I was thinking through is one, I think one place to do your prospecting, if you haven't done this already, is if you have your list of people, if you know what your target market is, I think one of the things that we forget to do a lot of times is think about events. Events is kind of a broad topic, but specifically, obviously events can be conferences. Events can also be webinars like this one. They could be executive briefings. Right? They could be live in-person events of your own. So you could go to, for example, meetup groups and do prospecting there. In different industries, like for example, in the construction industry or the health industry, a lot of times there are continuing education credits. I think they're called CCEs or CECs, continuing education credits. So when I was at Altos Research and we did market data and market reports for the real estate industry, one of the things that we used to do on a regular basis is this little traveling roadshow. And we would work with local mortgage title companies who would bring us in. I would teach about an hour and a half long class on how to use market data as a means to educate your consumers. consumers meaning the buyers and sellers of houses. And so we were able to get that class approved by local realtor associations and as an official continuing education credit, because most realtors and brokers, they have to go through this recertification process over the course of a year. And so I think in this case, using and sort of launching your own events is something that a lot of us are not doing really, really effectively. And so as a means to getting people to these events, then obviously you don't have to use just LinkedIn, right? There's email where you could go out and promote an event. There's the good old fashioned telephone that you could use to promote. There are partners that you could use that are helping you to promote that event. So I do workshops all the time. And one of the things we do to promote our workshops and webinars is we've got a whole list of partners that are also serving the startup space. So there's a group out in Sacramento called Startup Sac. And whenever we do an event, Laura Good, all I have to do is send her a quick note. Hey, Laura, I'm going to be running this workshop out in San Francisco. I think some of the startups here in Sacramento might be interested. Here's a link. Would you mind promoting that to your group? So it's a way for us to get the message out using other people in our marketplace that have already built trust with entire communities of the same exact type of prospect that we're going out after. So I think one place in particular that a lot of us fall short in our prospecting is we rely too much on sort of the digital side of prospecting, whether it's using LinkedIn or spammy email campaigns. And we forget that most people out there, they want to learn. They're looking for help in solving their problems. And so when you talk about events even more specifically, what we want to do is channel people into a situation where you're teaching and educating them around the key market problems that they're struggling with, and of course, that you can solve. And so that's just one huge area where I think a lot of startups and a lot of companies in general, they really fail to recognize that this is a huge opportunity to draw people in. And the reason in particular that I think events can be really, really useful for you is because if you've got your marketplace out here, this is your market with all of your leads or all your target leads, right? By announcing this event, what you're doing is you're getting people to self-select into that event. And then additionally, by offering this event, you can do what's called an outbound inbound strategy. And what I mean by that, by outbound inbound, is a lot of times when we hear the word outbound, what we think is like, oh, I got to pick up the phone and do cold calling, or I've got this list of people that I need to email, and I need to, do outbound and get, write some kind of slick email that gets them to want to reply to me so that they want to see a product demo or they want to hear more about what our company does. And the problem with that is most people don't care about your product, and most people are getting blasted with emails every day. And if you're anything like me, if I get a call on my phone and I don't recognize the number, I'm almost never going to answer the phone. But if instead of focusing our outbound campaign on getting people to look at our product, what if instead our outbound campaign was focused on an opportunity for them to learn and an opportunity for us to teach? Because that is a situation where people are feeling a lot less risk in that engagement. Even if I decide to reply to an email that looks like a company that might be able to help me, there's a lot of risks there. Like, one, as soon as I reply, then I'm going to get badgered by some salesperson. Two, if I agree to a 15-minute chat that turns into an hour-long discussion and demo, and then there's inevitably all the follow-ups that I'm going to get from that salesperson. There's a lot of risk there. Like, think about this is a seesaw, right? So there's a lot of risk in the typical outbound campaign and the replies to that outbound campaign. And worse, there's usually not much value here for me. Like, the value is, yeah, I could check out some kind of cool product. I might learn something about some new technology, but it's not really going to help me learn something new. What we want to do is actually turn this around, and if you do an outbound inbound campaign, what you're doing is you're actually reversing this. you're reducing the amount of risk that's involved in that communication with your target customer. So risk is actually much less, right? It's a lot lighter. And what you're really doing is stacking on the value here by teaching them something about their problem and how they might want to think about solving it. So that's one advantage to doing outbound, inbound, is that it's a much higher value and a much lower risk for your target market. The second reason that this becomes really important, so that's step one. The second reason this becomes really important is that when you're in a situation where you're the one teaching, what that allows you to do is frame the conversation. So we've got one of our clients that a company called Certified. They're a mortgage fraud detection company. And so I was on a call with them yesterday, and Tom, their CEO, is talking with me about the way they think about fraud. In particular, they think about fraud in the mortgage space. And what was really, really interesting to me, as we started pulling apart this concept of fraud, I'm sure like a lot of you hear the word fraud, it can mean a lot of things. It's this kind of big, nebulous term. It's kind of hard to think about, like, when you talk about fraud, what are you talking about? Is it identity fraud? Is it financial fraud? Is it like a false title on a house? There's all different kinds of ways of thinking about fraud. And so we dove into this a little bit more, and I said, well, like, Tom, when you talk about fraud, what exactly do you mean when you, like, what kind of fraud are you talking about? He said, oh, well, when we think about fraud, we actually measure fraud along 5 vectors. And right there, I was like, oh, this is interesting, because he used the word vector, which is kind of an unusual word. And so he mapped out for me in the call, he said, look, there are actually 5 vectors of fraud that most companies in the mortgage space are subject to interacting with at some point over the course of, if you do enough transactions as a mortgage company, you're going to encounter at least one of these 5 vectors of fraud. And so he went in and explained what each of those 5 were. And this is a key learning when you're thinking about your prospecting, because this alone, this idea of his 5 vectors of fraud, this is an opportunity for him to teach his market and educate them about fraud. But secondly, most importantly, this allows him to frame the conversation with his target market. Because now, if somebody is in fact interested in taking the next step into the sales process, he can then use these 5 vectors as a way to frame the entire rest of the sales conversation by saying, well, look, let's do an assessment of your company on how you're doing across each of these 5. Maybe in vectors 1 and 2, you're actually doing pretty well. In vector 3, it looks like you don't have this covered at all. Like, you don't have any strategies, any technology in place to handle number 3 and 4. And number 5, it sounds like you've got some stuff in place, but there really is room for improvement. So what would that allow you to do if you're out there prospecting and teaching people in a way, in a webinar, in an event, you can even use this if you're speaking on stage. This allows you to then create the conversation around the way in which you would solve the problem. So you've set yourself up as an authority, and now your target market is saying, oh, I never thought about it that way. And so this goes all the way back to, what if we didn't have LinkedIn? How would I prospect? And yeah, you could do the email campaigns, and yeah, you could do the cold calling. But what if instead of just blasting people with calls and emails, what if instead you could use an authority voice event, a market event, focus the outbound efforts that you're doing on email and phone and any other networks where you're trying to reach your market, instead of trying to get them to look at your product, what if instead you could say, hey, I'm going to make my outbound effort designed to get the people in my marketplace to opt in for the learning event. And in that learning event, they're going to learn something. It's going to be really, really valuable. Secondly, it's low risk because it's not some kind of product demo or salesperson. And thirdly, most importantly, probably for you, it allows you to frame the conversation in a way that puts you in control of the sale. So if I didn't have LinkedIn and I couldn't do anything else, then I would spend almost all of my time thinking about ways I could leverage existing events that are already being put on by the industry. It could be conferences, it could be local regional groups, it could be meetups, whatever is relate it to my marketplace, I would be working really, really hard to channel people into those events, whether they're digital, virtual like this one, or in person. So that's one thing in particular I would do if I didn't have the ability to use LinkedIn. The second thing I would do is think really, really hard about doing the outbound work through, like doing sales through partnerships. So I think a lot of places where most startups really fail to recognize an opportunity is working early in the company's life with partners. So as an example, one of the startups that I worked at before was a company called Blend. Those of you who know me, you know I worked at this. It was the most recent startup I worked at a few years ago. And that's the company where we were selling enterprise software to banks and mortgage lenders. And so while we were going after our target list, we had our top, the top 50 to 100 lenders, we're procedurally going after those folks in a very account-based manner. Who do we know at Wells Fargo? Who do our investors know at JP Morgan Chase? How do we get conversations going with those folks? The other place where we started developing partnerships were with consulting firms in the industry. And specifically, there's a company called Cognizant. Cognizant, I'm spelling that right. And there's other industry consultants. PwC is another one. And there's several other consulting firms that were serving the exact same executives that we were trying to sell to. And they were serving them to help them solve many of the exact same problems that we were trying to help them solve. So as an example, in the mortgage industry, mortgage compliance, a lot of the rules and regulations that came into the mortgage industry since the last housing crash have been really, really hard and were really, really difficult for a lot of companies to understand and adopt and then ultimately implement with their loan origination process. And so a lot of those banks would pay big bucks for these consulting companies to come in and teach them about systems that should be built and solutions to solving this compliance problem. But they're not technology companies. They could give them the plan and give them the strategy on how to make sure they were adhering to all the rules and regulations, but they didn't have any tech in order to actually implement this. And that's where we became a really good partner. So if we knew Cognizant was in there talking to NationStar, we could work with them and say, look, they would be a referral partner or a sales partner with us. So again, if I couldn't do any prospecting on LinkedIn and I was working on some events, I would also think about looking at other partners. Who else is serving my marketplace that I could develop a relationship with that was mutually beneficial? And the reason this is mutually beneficial, especially for a company like Cognizant, Cognizant actually also does a lot of tech implementations. And so for us, if a customer wanted to use Blend and configure it for their particular loan origination process, we could do it ourselves, and we had a team of engineers that could go on and sales engineers and implementation engineers that could configure that stuff. But if Cognizant is already servicing that customer, we could just have them do it. We could teach them to do the implementations, which is great for them because they get to boost up the number of hours and the amount of work that they're doing. And it's great for us because we can just focus on selling the software and not get mired in to all of the implementation kind of like stuff that goes into trying to get enterprise software to work. We can just teach them how to do the implementations. They handle it. We'd oversee it. Of course, we'd be involved, but we didn't have to have sales engineers on site to do all that kind of work. So those are the two places that ultimately, if I had to think about, like, where else would I prospect if I couldn't prospect on LinkedIn? Those are the two areas I would think about. One is events, doing an outbound inbound campaign, and then number two, I think hard about partners. So that's a couple of the lead gen things. Now the last thing that I would mention, the last kind of question around prospecting was, let's go back to a world where we do have LinkedIn. And so LinkedIn is a super useful platform if you know how to use it and if you know how to target your specific marketplace. And so one of the questions I got was, well, look, if I go to LinkedIn, right, there are literally millions of people on LinkedIn. And even within my target segment, right, there's, thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of, potential leads, people I would want to target eventually with my product or service. So how could I actually use LinkedIn as a way to connect with people and then get them out of LinkedIn and onto my email list? And like, really, this is really just more of a marketing question than anything. But again, I think it's a place where, as a startup, we fail to leverage our expertise in a way that allows us to pull people out of these social networks and into our marketing list. And so, one of the things that I would look at doing is, if you're doing events or you're doing a webinar or you've written a white paper or an ebook, if you have some kind of authority piece, then on LinkedIn, and you've probably seen me do this, this is how a lot of you come to this webinar today. On LinkedIn, just doing a post where you're sharing valuable information, and then at the end of that post, having a call to action that brings people out of LinkedIn and over to some kind of landing page where then they can enter their email address to download. So in a post, in a LinkedIn post, in an actual post on LinkedIn, you're limited to the number of characters and words that you can use. You can do a blog post on LinkedIn, which doesn't get quite the same level of traction or readership. But certainly within just like typing into LinkedIn's UI, you can type a couple hundred words. I think it's like 200 or 300 words is the sort of the max. Maybe it's like 1,500 characters. I don't know exactly what it is. And so one of the things I think you could do is, once you're connecting with your target market on LinkedIn, your first degree connections are going to start seeing your stuff in their feed. And so the first thing I would do is add value in these posts and say, oh, by the way, if you want more details, then click here and download our white paper, or click here and view a recording of us speaking at the recent industry conference. Find a way to pull them out of LinkedIn with something that is valuable. And again, think about that fulcrum of risk and value. So if something is high value because you're giving them something that's useful for their work, it's watching a video where they're going to learn something, downloading a white paper, downloading an ebook, downloading a book that you wrote, then they're going to be much more likely to opt in. And once they've opted in, now they're on your marketing list. So that's the easiest way that I found to leverage people off of LinkedIn and get them into your email list. And that's just being an authority and giving them a reason to download and interact with you. So, by the way, if you have any follow-up questions as we're going along, or anything that either makes sense or doesn't make sense, then by all means, go into that chat box and write down any questions that you have, because I can clarify anything that doesn't make sense, or go a little bit longer, a little bit deeper on something where you want a bit more detail. So that's kind of a couple of the questions that we had around leads, and thinking through, like, how do I get leads? How do I develop leads? What if how do I go find more qualified leads? I think ultimately what this comes down to is you have to be really, really clear about the market proposition, or the market, I would say the target market that you're going after, and the problem that you solve. So we've got this framework that we use called the Q framework. And the Q framework is actually 7 key questions that you can use to help you build out your sales process. The first 3 questions of the Q framework is first one is, what problem are you solving? Are you really, really clear about the problem that you solve for your market? Not just, hey, this is what our product does, but what problem does it solve in the marketplace? Number 2 is, which industry or segment are you targeting? So this is something you may have heard over and over again, is startups rarely die of starvation. They usually die of indigestion, right? David Packard, who of Hewlett Packard, wrote a book back in 1995, and he was kind of the first to be cited for that particular statement, which is, whether it's a startup or a business unit or a new product, he was saying that usually new products or new initiatives don't usually die of starvation, they die of indigestion. Meaning that oftentimes we try to like spray and pray, we try to sell to a lot of different industries instead of really focusing in and getting really, really narrow. And so if you're out there prospecting, you're trying to sell to a lot of industries, it's really, really tough. And the third question that we want to ask is who are the buyers? So once we've identified our target companies, our target customers, who are the people in those companies that are involved with the buying decision? Who's the economic buyer? Who's the technical buyer? Who are the user buyers? Who are my product champions? And if you know those three things, then that tells you everything you need to know about your message. It tells you where to go for sources of leads. Is your market on LinkedIn or not LinkedIn? Does your market come to events or doesn't come to events? Does your market listen to podcasts or not listen to podcasts? And then the third thing it tells you is who to target with that message through those sources. So if you're finding a hard time getting qualified leads, or you're finding a hard time getting people to respond to any kind of outbound campaigns or any kind of cold calling work that you're doing, I would suggest that you go back and try to answer these three questions. Are we really, really clear about the problem that we're solving? Do we have a niche or a market segment or an industry or vertical that we're targeting that's really, really specific? And third, who are the specific people within those companies that should be buying our stuff or are involved with the purchase of our product? Because those are the people that we should most care about targeting in our prospecting work. So a couple questions here on the prospecting side. So one, do these LinkedIn articles have to be authored by you or by other sources, internal or external? So if you're going to use the articles for lead gen, like if you're going to have like a call to action at the end, I mean, you could certainly use an external article. For example, if you saw, I'll just pick a company. Let's say IBM wrote a white paper about outsourcing your technology to, India. I'm just going to pick a topic. And let's say your company is a company that may have a disparate point of view on that. You might say, look, I just found this article, I was reading this article from IBM, or this white paper from IBM as to why, making all the arguments about why you should outsource your tech to India. We actually disagree. And we put a lot of thought to that. And in fact, here we wrote this white paper, and here are 5 reasons why you should not send and outsource your tech to India. Click here to download it. So you can use kind of that external piece as leverage, because people might look at, hey, this IBM thing, oh, IBM, I should pay attention. But you're actually using that as the hook to then get them into your content. So you can certainly do that with external articles by people. I would, obviously, if you're going to use external articles, like I would not simply like, oh, I saw this blog post by somebody, it's really great, I'm going to copy and paste it and make it my own without contribution, without citation. That would obviously not be ethical. You wouldn't want to do that. But I do think if there's a lot of people that are arguing on one side and you actually take the alternative point of view, you can use that to your advantage. So I hope that answers your question there about using LinkedIn articles, whether they have to be authored by you or somebody else. Bob's asking about defining marketing qualified leads versus sales qualified leads. Really, really good question, because this is top of the funnel stuff. So we think about, this is like super top of the funnel, right? We talked about prospecting. And so when I think about the way I define marketing qualified leads versus a sales qualified lead, a marketing qualified lead is really what you're doing is you're scoring somebody based on their activity. So if we're doing any kind of marketing to a list of people, like we do 2 or 3 times a week, we send out an email. So over the course of a week, I think it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we send out an email to people. And sometimes these emails are just like blog posts. Sometimes they're links to our podcast. Sometimes they're invitations to join these kinds of webinars. We're measuring, obviously we're going to measure to see who opens. Did somebody open it or not? So maybe they opened Monday, they didn't open on Wednesday, they opened on Friday. If somebody comes to a webinar, like did they register, right? They get a point. So what you're doing is kind of scoring your leads. And there's different companies have different levels of scores. it doesn't really matter what the scoring system is. It's just that you're saying there's a certain threshold of interaction and engagement from the people on my list that indicate to me they're actually interested in what we do. And so that's telling you is that the marketing that you're doing is helping you signal people who are potentially a qualified lead. So the marketing qualified lead is just basically some kind of interaction or engagement level that you decide is minimally the amount of interaction engagement that would warrant and in one in which they would welcome a sales conversation of some kind. And so if you do your marketing qualified leads, if you're using an email system like ActiveCampaign or Infusionsoft or even MailChimp, something like that. I say even MailChimp, it's a very powerful platform. Any of those products, you can set up a very simple rudimentary lead scoring system that then allows your salespeople to say, okay, well, here are, let's say we have 1,000 people on our list, and it looks like, over the past month, like these top, 10% of leads are kind of meeting this minimum criteria of being a marketing qualified lead. So I'm actually going to reach out to those people and maybe invite them to a webinar where they can opt in for a call. Or I'll just pick up the phone and give them a call and say, hey, Bill, thanks, or hey, Bob, thanks for, it looks like, you've been receiving a bunch of our emails over the last couple months, and looks like you even registered for the webinar last week. Were you able to attend? Yeah, I was able to attend. It was really great. I learned this really cool stuff about how we should be thinking about prospecting. Really, that's great. Well, listen, is that an area of focus for you right now with your business? Are you really struggling with sales prospecting? Yeah, really having a tough time with that. Interesting. So I don't know if you knew this, but here over at Sales Quality, we have a couple of different ways where we help companies with their sales prospecting. Would you like some help with that? Yeah, I think I would like some help with that. Cool. So here's what we should do. What if we get you 15 minutes on the calendar with Scott, and the two of you could have a quick chat, and he can figure out, what exactly it is that you need on the prospecting side, and then decide whether or not it's a good fit for us to have a bigger conversation. Would that be okay? Yeah, that sounds good. When do we do that? Cool. Well, I just booked you in Thursday at 10 o'clock. Awesome. What you've done is now you have a sales qualified lead, right? Somebody has gone through your marketing funnel, you've engaged with them, and now they're in your sales qualification process. Right? You've qualified them as being a sales lead, and now they're entering your sales pipeline down below. So marketing qualified lead is really you watching their activity from afar, and a sales qualified lead is them actually engaging with you and wanting to take a step into the sales funnel. So that's the way I would think about that. Now, sometimes people go in and out. We'll have marketing qualified leads that just never become sales qualified leads. We might reach out to people and offer a 15-minute chat, and they're just like, oh, no, not right now, but thanks for the emails. And on the other hand, we'll have people that will go through our sales process, and they'll actually engage. And then at the end, we just realize like, oh, it's just not, they decide, or we decide it's just not the right fit, in which case they've gone through the sales process, and it's a no, or it's a not right now. And then they just, we just put them back into the marketing funnel. We don't delete them from the list. Just say, okay, cool, it's not right now. That's fine. And we've had plenty of people that come to our workshops. We've got a client right now, a guy named Trevor at Quill. He came to a workshop 2 years ago, and he's been on the list for 2 years. At the workshop, we had some folks that are like, hey, I think I might, work with you as a coach. Like, how does that work? Talked with him about it. He's like, okay, let me think about it. And it just wasn't the right time. 2 years later, after being on the list, he replied to a marketing email. He's like, hey, listen, company's really growing. We just closed a Series A. I think I want to get some more help now. Cool. So he went through kind of a sales process at the time 2 years ago. Wasn't the right fit. Put him back into the marketing list, and then he just worked his way back through it 2 years later. So that's the way I would kind of think through what to do with those qualified leads. So Gary's asking a follow-up question here, like, when does this SQL become an opportunity? And SQL becomes an opportunity after they've passed the qualification test. So by qualification, meaning that they have, there's a clear need, there's clearly urgency. The person you're dealing with is part of the buying team, or is the authority that's going to make the buying decision, and they have the financial wherewithal to make the purchase. They have budget. or they have the ability to make an investment, knowing that, okay, it might be a little bit expensive to make this investment now, but we have believed that this product is going to get us a return on that investment. So they become an opportunity after they've gone through your qualification process and they passed that test. So that's when they become that sales qualified lead and then move into your sales pipeline, where an account executive or account manager or you as a CEO would then march them through the specific sales process. Okay, now that you're qualified, I'll show you the product. Let's build out a work plan. Let's talk through implementation. Let's put some goals and outcomes together. Does this look good? Yep. Okay, cool. Here's the price. Sounds good. Boom. Let's convert. So they come out, they move out of your sales prospecting. They no longer become a lead. They are now an active opportunity because they're qualified. So, cool. So let's keep jamming on this. So I do want to get into, I think maybe this is a good segue to talk about opportunities and what do you do? How do you convert deals? Like, what is the sales process? We got couple of questions about pilots, pilot programs. How do I use pilot programs? How do I use proof of concepts, POCs? Excuse me. How do we leverage POCs and how do we convert from a proof of concept to a pilot or from a pilot to a full implementation? Bill, I see your question. I'll come back to that at the end if that's okay with you. And so I'm going to just kind of talk through sales cycles and pipeline and pilots as kind of the next round of questions. And so let's talk a little bit about pilots. So let's assume you've got a qualified lead. You've brought them through, you've done your work prospecting, you've pulled them through, they're now a qualified lead and you're engaging with them about a potential implementation. Again, I'll go back to that fulcrum that we talked about before, right? There's this risk, there's perception of a lot of risk working with you, and there's this perception that maybe there's not a lot of value in the price and the investment that we're going to make, not just the monetary investment, but the time investment that we're going to make. And so oftentimes as a startup, one of the things we want to do is we want to remove that risk from the equation as much as possible. And one of the ways we can do that is through pilot programs. And the way to think about a pilot program, and Bob, I should mention, like, this is something that John and I were just working on the other day in one of the sales acceleration calls. The way you want to think about this is if you're starting here today and you've got an active sales opportunity, right? Let's just say in 6 months or 12 months, depending on how long your sales cycle is, you want to get to a full implementation, whatever that looks like. I think a lot of you can imagine what a full implementation looks like. So whenever you're selling, like, the way I think about this is if I'm sitting here today, the first thing I want to try to do is, like, I want to try to sell the full thing. I want to, hey, if somebody's willing to pull the trigger and go forward and do a full implementation from the get-go, that'd be awesome, right? Just buy 1 million units and we're good to go. But we know that most customers, especially when they're buying from startups, they perceive that as being too risky. And so we want to peel that back and say, well, okay, well, look, if we're not going to do a full implementation, what if we did some kind of phased rollout where we had, phase 1 is 50 units, phase 2 is we install another 200 units, and then phase 3 is we do the last 750. And so we kind of go in phases. And as part of our phased rollout, if for whatever reason during phase 1, let's just say, things are just going really, really poorly, then things are going south, then look, we'll have some metrics in place. We'll be watching the implementation. If for some reason it just doesn't look like this is the right fit as much as it looks good on paper now, if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit, let's not force it, then we can exit the contract, if we're not hitting certain metrics. But if things are, maybe things are going okay, but not perfect, well, then let's think about how we can calibrate this process, and maybe we just want to extend out phase 1 and move phase 2 down the road a little bit, right? And then obviously if things are going great, which is what we both want and what we both expect, then it's a green light to keep moving up to the rest of the phases. So it's a way for the customer to reduce the perception of risk because they know they have this phase 1 rollout, and if something doesn't work, they can get off or get back on track, right? So you're just reducing risk. So that's the phased implementation. Now from there, you might still get customers like, I know it's still a big commitment. You're still asking us to commit to 1,000 units or 1,000 seats or whatever it is that you're selling. So this is where you would say, okay, cool. Well, no problem, because we actually have a pilot program that we like to roll out in situations like this. And the pilot program works like this. So what we'll do is we'll say take those first 50 units and we're going to install them. And this pilot program, we're going to monitor it over, say, a 90-day period. And we're going to be looking for some key measures, right? We're going to be looking for some KPIs as part of this pilot program. And the idea of the pilot program is that the job of the pilot is for us mutually to kind of think of it as hypothesis testing. You and the client both want to believe that this product will work for them. They have a problem. They need to solve it. They want to believe that your product is going to solve it for them, but they just need to verify before they commit to this big rollout. That's the reason for doing a pilot. It's not a test in the sense that, hey, we're going to roll this out and you're just going to sit back. All right, let's see what you got. That's not a pilot, right? That's not collaborative. That's not partnership. What we want is the customer saying, look, man, I want to roll this out. I just got to get some proof. I got to get some data to make sure and verify that your product does in fact solve the problem that we have. So there should be engagement. And there should also mean that these pilots are paid. Because if you don't have a paid pilot, all you have is free users. You have a free trial if it's not paid, right? And so that's the place where you would sell the pilot or use the pilot. And then if the pilot, if they're still like, well, the pilot, it's not, the timing's not right. I'd love to do a pilot maybe in Q1 of next year because, you know, it's coming up to holidays and it's just really hard to get people focused. Then I would say, great. So in the meantime, what we want to do is a proof of concept where maybe we just roll out 5 units or 5 users or 5 licenses for one specific team just to show, get some early proof points of how this might work, and that will help inform us for a pilot that we're going to run in Q1. And so the whole idea of this diagram is to think about always, instead of selling incrementally, which is what a lot of us do, like, oh, you know, let's just do a POC. You know, let me just give you 5 licenses and see how it goes. And then we do the 5 licenses, and then they kind of like it. They're like, cool, great. Let's do a pilot. And then it kind of goes well, maybe okay, great. Let's go sell a phased implementation. Then let's go sell a full implementation. What we want to do, our job as salespeople, is to sell the future, like sell the full implementation, and just keep peeling back to the point where they're ready to take action now. But we've already pre-sold the notion like this is the direction that we're going to be going. And so the way to make sure that those pilots lead to those next steps is just make sure you follow a couple of key parameters around your pilot programs. So the first thing we always want to do is make sure that your pilots are paid. Like I said before, if you don't have it, if your pilot's not paid, what you have is a free trial, and free trials suck. Like they just don't. It's very, very rare that free trials work in enterprise sales. There's lots of companies that do free trials, and those companies that do free trials have a whole machine behind that free trial to make sure that those customers convert, assumably. A lot of people that do free trials, they don't have that. They're doing free trials because they think that's what they're supposed to do, but it's actually not converting the way that you think that they're converting. So if you're going to do a pilot, number one, you want to make sure that they're paid. The second thing you want to do with your pilots is make sure that they're short. They should be just long enough to prove some measure of success and not a day longer. So meaning that if 90 days is the shortest time possible to get results, to start showing results in the right direction, make your pilots 90 days. Don't make it 6 months if it needs to be, if it only needs to be 90 days. Don't make it 90 days if you can get it done in 6 weeks. We did a 90-day pilot with NationStar when I was at Blend, and after the first 4 days, they were sold. They like, we got it. We want to do a full implementation. Now the full implementation took us another 6 months because we had to go through security and compliance and all these other things, but they were sold in the first 4 days, even though we initiated a 90-day pilot. So you just want to keep them as short as possible to prove some success. Again, you're partnering when you're doing these pilots. It's not a test. Hey, here's my paper, and I want you to grade it and let me know if I got a C- or an A+. Your customer should want you to get an A, right? This should be a partnership with them, because they're investing, even if they're only investing a small amount of money for the pilot, they're still investing a lot of their time and their team and their social capital to rolling out this pilot with you. So number one, pilots should be paid. Number two, they should be short. Number three, they should be measured, so that you can point to what we are testing, what are we evaluating as part of this pilot. Not, well, let's install it and see how it goes, because it could go great from your standpoint, like, wow, we just knocked it out of the park. And at the end of the pilot, the customer's like, yeah, that was really good, but yeah, we're just not going to go forward with this. You're like, well, why not? Like, wow, it just didn't do what we thought it was going to do. But it did everything that we thought it was going to do. And so before the pilot begins, you want to establish, what are those KPIs? What are those metrics? Maybe it's one metric, maybe it's three, maybe it's five, but you want to have agreement as to what you're measuring going into that pilot, so that you can point exactly to where it's successful or where you need to calibrate if things are off track. So number one, make sure they're paid. Number two, make sure they're short. Number three, make sure they're measured. Number four, you want to think like, almost like technology enabled consulting. And what I mean by that, when you go live with a pilot, it's not like, okay, here you go get him, customer, I hope it works out. You need to be involved with the implementation. That means going on site. It means doing the training. It means sitting with the users to make sure they know how to log on. I'll use the example from NationStar that I just mentioned before when I was at Blend. We go live with the pilot. People are trying to log in. They're like, oh, I can't log in. Okay, well, let's type in your username again. They type it in, it's not working. Try it a third time. I'm like, I know this works. I just tested it in the hotel room 45 minutes ago. I know that this login works. And we look down, he's like, oh, my caps lock's on. Is it case sensitive? Yeah, man. The usernames are case sensitive. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Right? If I'm not there fixing that problem, that guy never would have logged in. Something as simple as a login. So the other factor to that is that very first day, we found and fixed 24 bugs. 24 bugs in the first day, right? If we weren't there on site, we wouldn't have been able to figure out what was going on. I was taking pictures with my phone of the screen, texting them to Devin, who was the on-site engineer with us, and he's in there hacking on the code and fixing it and pushing new code releases as we're going throughout the day. Again, if we weren't on site, if we didn't think more like technology-enabled consultant, we would have been successful, right? So paid, short, measured, tech consulting. Does anybody know what the fifth one might be? I'm just kind of curious. What's the fifth if we want the pilot to be successful? Feedback? Julian, what do you think the fifth one is? Path to conversion? What else? The last one is a little hint here. You want to keep them small. That's why it's the top box. You want to keep them small, small because this is going to allow you to keep this pilot successful, right? There's this tendency, your customer, believe me, they're going to be excited. They're going to want to roll out, this like, hey, why don't we run it with 3 different departments at the same time? We'll have these 50 and these 50 and these 50 users, because then we can like ABC test them and do all these things, and they'll have all these grand ideas, and you're going to get excited, like, wow, they want to do a big pilot. This is really going to be great. The problem is, the more people and the bigger the implementation, the harder it's going to be for you to keep your arms around it. The harder it's going to be for you to measure success. When things do go awry, it's going to be harder for you to fix them. So you want to keep them small. You can always grow them over time, but if you make them too big, then you're setting yourself up. You're exposing yourself to a lot of risk. So I think if you keep to these 5 principles around your pilots, with the pilot only being offered after they're clear, after your customer's clear as to what that full implementation looks like and where to go, that path to conversion like Bob just said, talked about. Like after the pilot, yes, we're gonna treat the pilot as a pilot, and after it's successful, we'll actually also have gotten phase 1 done. So then we can go to phase 2 in Q1, and then we can go to phase 3 in Q2. And then the rollout just becomes this nice smooth transition from pilot to full implementation. So there's a lot of questions there that were submitted around pilots and how do I think about POCs and pilots and conversions, like compressing timelines, making sure my conversion rates are good, making sure that I've got the right systems in place to make conversions work. And so I just want to kind of take some time to address a few of those questions. Should POCs also be paid? If possible, I think it's reasonable to ask somebody to pay for a POC. And I would just like cage it this way, like, look, especially, the product price, like, it's $500 a unit or it's $50 a seat. It's not that, okay, we're gonna have 5 users use it and make $250. It's just more about, are you dealing with somebody who actually has authority to write you a check, right? Like if that person can't write you a $1,000 check or can't approve $5,000 for a small POC to solve what is probably a multi-million-dollar problem, chances are you're not in front of the right people. And so you're going to be chasing after the POC, like, oh, the POC went great, so now I got to talk to my boss about doing a pilot. And now you're stuck in this kind of chase push mode. And that's why we want to sell the full implementation and then just keep peeling it back. So ultimately, by getting somebody to scratch you a check, it just tells you that they're serious. It was described to me that when people pay, they pay attention, because that means somebody's on the hook for it. So even if it's a nominal amount, and you can just say, look, like neither of us are going to get rich. I'm not going to get rich by you spending $1,000 for this proof of concept. This is just a filter we use because look, we got 50 companies right now that we're talking to that would all love us to do a proof of concept. And we just, like, we're a small company. We only want to implement with our earliest customers, with the people that are most serious about making a change in their organization. And so the reason we're charging $1,000, we just want to know who's serious and who's not. So I hope that's not too much to ask, but if you think you could scrape up a few pennies and throw us $1,000, that would really mean a lot to us to let us know that you're in fact serious about moving forward with us in this process. So yeah, I would go for a payment. And if not, if they're like really, really resistant, say, okay, cool. That's fine. The POC is this defined 2-week period. This is what you're going to get. And after the POC, just like you would do with a pilot, put some metrics on it. Say, look, if we're successful, if we both agree that this is the metric and we hit that number, then we're going to move into a pilot. Are we in agreement? Yes. Okay. So at least you have a soft contract in place to move to the next level of that implementation. So cool, David. I'm glad to hear that this is very, very timely for you. So let's think about let's continue kind of going through this timeline here with the customer. We've got, a little bit of time left. So we talked about prospecting, we talked about pipeline. So now you've got your customer, right? Now you're implementing with them. So it's kind of like, here they were, before they were, let me just do it this way, actually. So here they were in your pipeline, and now, right now, whoo, you did it. They're a paying customer. Awesome. Good on you. Pat yourself on the back, share, celebrate with your team, tell your investors you're on your path to being the next billion-dollar Silicon Valley company. And now we got to think about, well, as our product grows, the product that we're delivering is going to continue to increase in terms of its value. We're going to keep making it better. We're going to add features. We're going to add functionality to that product. And secondly, we're probably also going to be building other products and other services around that first product as a startup. Like the product you have today is probably not the only product that you have in your mind or on your product roadmap. And so a couple of the questions we got, well, like how do we continue thinking about moving a customer from being paying us $1 amount to paying us more down the road and even more after that. And so this is a topic of upselling or cross-selling across multiple business units. And so one of the things the root cause, if you're having a hard time cross-selling or upselling, the root cause of this typically is that after somebody becomes a paying customer, we sort of like put them into the support queue, like great, now we got them up and running, and the account management team or the customer success team is going to manage them. And then we'll just kind of hope that as they grow, they're going to buy more subscriptions, or they're going to want to buy more of our products. So instead, what we want to do is think about the process from sale to implementation to customer success as one long, continuous process. And what I mean by that is, if you think about timelines, just say they give you the commitment, right, and the contract on January 1. Well, we know that there's probably some implementation period, depending on the product, depending on the company. That implementation period includes getting things configured. If you have like an enterprise solution that sometimes has to, you've got like a base platform or a base version, and you have to set up workflows, or you have to set up dashboards, some level of configuration. There's probably some integration. Okay, so we want you to integrate with Salesforce, or we want to get it so that our data files from our database automatically stream into your platform. So we got to hook up the APIs. So there's the integration stuff. There's the training aspect. So, okay, we've got 50 users here. We got to make sure they're all up and running. So you've got the training period. And then you've just got the general usage, making sure that people transition from the old way into the new way. So that first phase, right, this is truly implementation, which is really, frankly, still part of the sale, right? They're still nervous. They gave you the commitment. They're excited because you're going to solve their problems. But they're still kind of like keeping a watched eye on you. There becomes a time, though, where the implementation kind of like fades a little bit. And what picks up over here is account management. And the best way possible that I found to help with cross-sells and upsells and making sure that you're staying on top of your customers is you just want to insert regular communication with them. So some people call them quarterly business reviews, QBRs. Sometimes they're called strategy sessions. So as you're implementing, and even before you're implementing, as you're selling your product, talk to your customers about implementation. Okay, so when we implement, if you give us the go-ahead, this is how we're going to configure, this is how we're going to integrate, this is how we do training, this is how we're going to make sure users are using it in the first 30, 60, 90 days. And at the end of that first 90-day period, we'll do our first quarterly business review. And that's an opportunity for us to do a look back on the implementation, figure out what went well, what we can do to improve, and learn more about how your business may be changing. Because if we need to go back and reconfigure, or we need to expand the number of users, or we need to move to a second business unit. And then every 90 days, we're going to do another quarter business review. So every 90 days, you just insert this as part of your customer success plan, and you just get those booked in at the time of implementation. When they sign the contract, one of the things you'll want to do is, great, we're going to map out the implementation plan for the first 30, 60, 90 days, and let's book our first quarterly business review right now for March the 31st or for June 15th. And then let's just get one in the calendar right now for the rest of the year. So we have it. We can always move it. But let your customers know this is a standard part of the way that you do business. And in those quarterly business reviews, it's an opportunity for you to learn about their business and how their needs are changing, and telling them and previewing new products that are coming out. Like, hey, the first quarterly business review we're going to do on March 31st, I can tell you already, I can't wait for that, because I know our product team and our engineering team is working on some really awesome stuff. I can't tell you about it right now. It's coming out in January, but by the time we get together in March and that stuff is released, I want to show it to you because I think you're really, really going to love it. All right, so now you're pre-selling the upsell, or you're like, oh, by mid-year next year, I just came from a meeting with a product team. They've already mapped out our entire product roadmap for 2019. And one of the things that they're really excited about is that we're going to be building a second product to work on this or that problem. And so when we get together in March, I can give you a preview of that product that's going to be coming out in June. So you've set the stage for you to do the upsell by giving yourself permission, by installing this as part of your customer success plan. There's a really good dude that you should check out. His name is Lincoln Murphy. If you haven't checked him out, definitely do that. He does, he's really focuses on this concept of customer success. I just read a blog post from him the other day. And what he was mentioning in the post is that most of your customers don't know what else it is that you could do for them. Whether that's something as simple as coming on site and doing a workshop that they might pay for to teach their executives about ways to think about the problem, all the way through to other products and services. And so making sure that they know about that is imperative for you to grow the account. And one of the ways you do that is to install these QBRs into your process. Yeah, Bill, it's also a great way to get needs-based feedback. And it's also good to do product, get ideas for products, bring your product manager along. It's a totally non-salesy thing. It's just a conversation between somebody who's already a customer. So that's the way I would think about pilots, and then roll those into your long-term customer success strategy. I got a couple of pings here from some folks. Julian, if you would, go ahead and throw in the chat box, put my calendar in there right now, because I had a couple people ask me about this, and I want to mention it. I want to do a couple more questions, but I want to mention it now. So we obviously covered a ton of ground here today, just in the live Q&A, but we've had some people ask me, sending many messages prior to this webinar, and I get this question all the time, which is like, how do I implement some of these strategies with my business? And so we do what's called a scale session, a scale up session. And so the scale up session is really simple, where we just dive into your business and talk through what are some of the key challenges that you have right now relative to where you want to go with your business over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And then we build you a plan for the next 100 days on how you can implement with some of these strategies. And so if you want to book in one of those calls with me, you can grab a time from the calendar, and we can work on that together. It's something that we don't charge for that. It's just something that we do for our clients or for our folks on our list. The reason we do it for free is because you and I both know that there's just some percentage of people out there that are going to want more help, and they're going to want to learn about our coaching program. And so that's why I'm willing to offer that for free. And if you don't want to join the programs or anything, or if it's not the right fit, that's totally cool. You're still going to get an awesome plan from that scale up session. So definitely invite you to take advantage of that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I know that some people are needing to jump off over the next few minutes. So definitely take advantage of that if you want a little more help implementing some of this stuff. David's asking, do you have anything for sales reps instead of CEOs? Yeah, we do. We have a program called the 100-Day Sales Accelerator, which a lot of teams use it as a sales rep training opportunity. And I don't want to talk about that stuff too much here, but if you feel like you could use some help implementing some of these ideas and installing some frameworks, then you could use the scale up session to chat a little bit more about that, to see what your team needs. So anyway, one last set of questions that I wanted to go through was on so we talked about prospecting, we talked about pipeline, we talked about customers and upsells. There was also kind of the sidebar about management, when to hire and who to hire for your sales people, for your sales team. And so I think the easiest way for me to describe this in a sort of a model format is thinking about kind of the stages of growth for most that we have found, that I found that startups go through. So stage one is the true startup stage. So in the startup stage, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your first 10 paying customers, right? That's the job of the startup stage. You're going from, hey, I've got this idea and I've built this product. I got to see if this product solves the problem that's out there, right? And you're just trying to see who's willing to pay you. And those first 10 customers, a lot of times there's a lot of variance in there. You've got big companies and small companies in different industries. You're just trying to get a feel for where does the problem product fit. Before you get product market fit, you got to get problem product fit, right? The second, and this stage is just, it's the CEO, it's the founder, it's all hands on deck. If it's even a technical co-founder that doesn't like to talk to people, that person's going to get involved with sales, whether it's something as simple as like pinging a buddy of theirs that went to school with that could be a potential prospect, to getting that person on the phone with a potential prospect and helping them understand how the platform works. It's all hands on deck. And it's typically the founder, the CEO, that is doing all the selling there. The next phase of growth is what's called the ramp up stage. And really the goal here in the ramp up stage, this is that magic $1 million ARR that we hear over and over and over in Silicon Valley. Once you get to $1 million in annual recurring revenue, then we can talk about a Series A, says every investor ever, right? And so this is the place where you as a CEO or founder, or maybe it's you and one kind of biz dev person, you're kind of managing a lot of the sales. The trick here is in stage one, this is all about viability of your company. Viability. Stage two is about repeatability, right? And in this ramp up stage, this is where you'll start to figure out things like your prospecting plan of action. How do we pull people through our sales pipeline? What does our customer success strategy look like? And this is oftentimes where you start to see an opportunity to hire like an SDR type of person. We just did a private call with a woman named Trish Bertuzzi, who's at the Bridge Group. She's a expert in SDR. She helps inside sales teams, usually larger companies. She came and did a presentation with our Elevate Mastermind group, which is a group just for startup CEOs. And one of the things that she talked about when it comes to SDRs is if you're going to hire one, you should hire two, because the market shows that there's a 50% failure rate in SDRs. And plus you want to have like an A/B test in terms of your hiring and your process. Can I replicate this? I've done all of the prospecting myself as the CEO. And how do I know if the person is successful? Are they successful because of what I've taught them and I've hired well? Or are they successful just because they're just a real go-getter and they figured stuff out? If I have two, then I might have one person succeed, one person fail, or I can have them both fail. In which case I'm like, wow, somewhere in my process is really screwed up. I got hired wrong, or my expectations are wrong, or I'm just really bad at managing SDRs. So you might hire an SDR there. You might, the SDR might also be a customer success person. So they work with people at the front end of the funnel, then they hand them over to you as a founder, you manage the deal, you get them converted, and then you hand them back over to the SDR. So they're kind of like straddling both sides of the sales funnel. And you might end up starting to hire like your first account executive, somebody to help you convert and land some of the bigger deals as you're moving up in price points. The third stage is what we call the scale up. This is the fun part, right? This is the getting to the 10 million ARR plus, from 10 million up to 100 million, right? And so you go from viability to repeatability to scalability. And this is where you're really going to have like a whole team. Like you've got a VP of sales, right? You've got your SDRs, you've got your AEs, you've got your customer success people. And so, depending on your business, sometimes there's one-to-one, one SDR per AE. Sometimes there's one SDR for 3 AEs. Sometimes it's the opposite depending on your lead gen. But you're going to have your team of SDRs, your team of AEs, and your team of customer success people all rolling up to a sales VP at that point. So a mistake we see a lot of times is companies hire a VP of sales way too early, like so early that they're still in startup stage here. And they're like, wow, if I could just find a really great VP of sales to help me figure out my sales process and get my first 10 customers, that would be awesome. Well, guess what? Most VPs of sales are not good at starting from scratch in terms of building out a sales process. It's really unusual to find that person. Frankly, it's up to you to get the first 10 customers. If you don't want to sell, or you're afraid to sell, or for whatever reason, you're just not thinking that sales is something that you should be doing on a day-to-day basis, you got much bigger problems than trying to find a VP of sales. So a lot of times when we're working with teams, and a lot of what I've read and what I've seen is the longer you can hold off to hiring a VP of sales, the better. Because that means you, the CEO, are the VP of sales. You have a much closer touch with what's going on with these early sales hires into the ramp-up phase, and even kind of self-managing the whole team under the SDRs and AEs and the customer success people. After you've got some basic frameworks, then you can bring in a VP of sales. So maybe it's once you get to $1 million, you get the Series A, now you can hire the VP of sales to help you really build and scale the basic frameworks that you've built in the ramp-up stage. The good news is that VP of sales will be cheaper for you in a lot of ways because you've raised the Series A and you've gone through that equity threshold. You're not relying on them to build as much for you, and it's a really distinct part of the sales growth of your company is to go from finding a VP of sales that's taken a company from 1 or 2 million up to 10, right? And that could be a 3-year process, and then you find a different VP of sales that's able to take a company from 10 to 100. Not everybody can grow and scale with the roles. There's different people do different VPs of sales based on the stage that you're in, and so that's kind of the general framework that most people need to be thinking about when it comes to hiring. And more broadly, like I think it's important to think through this whole growth curve, right? If we think of a growth curve, here's time, and then here's your growth measure. When you're in the startup stage, if you think about what goes on in the startup stage, the challenge is, see if I can blow this up a little bit. There we go. The challenge is in the startup stage, you're putting in a lot of time and effort. It could take 12 to 24 months to get those first 10 customers, but the growth that you see is actually like really, really small. You're like, I'm putting all this effort and I'm only getting a little bit of growth, right? Things get a little better though if you get through that stage, right, for the same amount of time, the same, say 12 or 24 months to go from your first 10 customers to 1 million or 2 million ARR, that same effort and time, now all of a sudden you're starting to see a little bit more output. Could have done a better job of drawing that, but usually your growth is actually going to be more up here, right? And then the last phase, that scale up phase, that's where again over 2 years, 3 years, you go from 1 to 10, then your growth, the benefits are much higher. And so in each of those stages, as I mentioned, you want to think about the key outcomes here. One is, I mentioned, problem product fit. The second is finding your first customers. And the third is building out your first bit of revenue. Like that's the job of the startup stage. In the ramp up stage, this is where we start dialing in your sales process a little bit. That's the prospecting, figuring out who to go after, how to go after them, where to go after them, what's the message, how do I use LinkedIn, how do I use events, how do I use partners, how do I use email, do I use outbound, do I do only inbound? Knowing how to build and manage a sales pipeline, different deals in different stages. And then finally, how am I building out my paying customers? And that's customer success strategy. That's kind of the job of that ramp up stage, is to figure those 3 things out. And then finally, you get to this scale up stage, and this is all about your KPIs and your metrics. Now you have, you've got your Series A or your Series B, depending on where you are. You've got to answer to the board. You've got your quarterly numbers. You've got to give individual contributors their numbers and how they're going to roll up to the company outcomes that you have to get to every month and every quarter and every year, right? So now you're not doing the work, you're managing the work, and you've got to give people visibility as to what their job is and what outcomes they have to hit in order for the company to hit their outcomes. Then you have your hiring challenge. How do I find, recruit, interview, hire, onboard the right talent? And then finally, how do I manage the team? I've got a sales team now. How do I do my daily stand-ups? What am I doing weekly on my pipeline reviews? How do I manage people monthly? When do I promote? When do I fire? When do I have to just manage and coach people up and teach them and bring them the help that they need in order to be successful? So you kind of think about, if you think about those 3 sub steps in each of these 3 phases, then this should tell you what you should be focusing on in each stage. So again, I mentioned this in context of this VP. So a lot of times people they're like way back here trying to get first customers and revenue, and they're trying to do stuff that's really scale up stage stuff, right? Or they're way back here trying to get their first revenue, and they're trying to get their pricing page perfect on their website. Like that's a thing later on. You can dial in your pricing page later. Let's just figure out how to get some money in the door. So if you kind of use this as kind of a framework to think through what should you be worried about, which phase of growth, this is kind of think of it as a journey from your idea that you started with to making the impact that you want to make in your marketplace. So, all right, guys. Well, listen, gang, guys, gals, everyone in between. It is reaching the bottom of the hour. I'm a little hungry. It's almost lunchtime. We've been going for a while. I hope this has been really, really useful. If there's any questions that I didn't get to, please let me know. If you want to take advantage of that scale session, by all means, click the link, book in a time. We do these live Q&As every month. We'll probably do it again in December. Pretty sure we're going to do it in December. We have it on the books. Right now, I might be doing a live in-person workshop in San Francisco. If not in person, like in the same room, I might do a half-day kind of virtual workshop as well. So keep your eyes peeled for information about that. Nothing on the books yet, but something we're talking about internally. In the meantime, if you haven't downloaded a copy of the book, you're welcome, Molly. Yeah, Bill, you got it, man. We can get you, if you go to the signature of below my name and most of the emails that go out, there's a link where you can download a copy of the Startup Selling book. I've got another book coming out next year called the Q Framework. And yeah, so look, here to help. If you want some more help, book in a scale session. We'll build out a plan and take things from there. All right. So thanks so much, everyone. If there's anything else we can do to help you out, let me know. Talk to you later.